AP courses, and it would just mean that we would need to increase the funding for these areas.
I will echo my colleagues, but I do remember the day when the state, the DOE, did have a call for AP textbooks or instruction materials, and that was wonderful when the funds were there. So to answer the question, I don't believe that AP, as far as funding goes, since it generates its own funding at the school level, depending on the scores, correct? Mm-hmm. And it just depends on what you do with those dollars within your district. Because I know how Palm Beach County was and how we use those dollars. It's not the answer that you want to hear, but the gentleman to my far right has the powers to help that.
You're like,
You're here.
Okay, you're here. All right. Let's see. Again, okay, so number 7 kind of piggybacks on there, and I think that maybe Kathy will be able to say that, and Bill just alluded to the fact that, as those of you that have been around a little bit, when they made the call at the state for AP courses, we were like, great, we've got this avenue, and I know we've spoken about it. And I wrote this question before I knew about the new website, and we had asked Kathy to please, her folks, help us find those AP titles. So without the call, because they don't follow the state standards, right, in the AP courses, so there was no call at the state. So they are going to have that, but the question resides in, will there ever be an avenue for advanced placement to submit materials to the state for review? I know it would not be over state standards, but it would be College Board standards for that particular course, or the standards for that AP Stats, AP Calc. So I don't know if you want to start, Kathy?
No, well, and I think you actually made the point beautifully, and that's kind of why it got away from a state review process for the AP courses, because it's not necessarily aligned to Florida standards for a specific course, and that those can change district per district, and the review process for state adopted material is very statute driven. And how that review process is written right now just really doesn't allow that wiggle room that you guys would be looking for AP courses.
And I think that hopefully with the new website where they do the AP, I know we've spoken about possibly putting up the AP on the Fatima website. Publishers that have material for those particular courses, usually what I do is just ask them, do you have something to submit for AP Stats? But if the publisher has not contacted me, it's somebody maybe that does only AP titles, I might not know. So I think having an avenue and you asking, you'll have it on the website. So we've been asked this for a couple years, and I'm thankful that they're putting that up. How much time do we have real quick? Okay, so about 25 minutes. So the next question is, do you see parents' roles in the educational materials increasing or decreasing due to technology resources that are available? Anybody?
I will read it.
I'll share Valentina.
I'll share her responses. Increasing, providing materials online establish parents to have more access to review the materials prior to the adoption. Through school websites, parents are kept abreast of not only their child's progress, but also made aware of specific topics, activities, and assessments in which their child is involved. For example, having online access to textbooks and other learning materials further increases parent involvement at home and enhances modeling of healthy homework habits. All of these resources enhance paternal interest and involvement in the materials used in their children's education.
That was a mouthful.
I would agree. This is more from a parent perspective rather than my job role. But my daughter started kindergarten, and I am just amazed at what I am able to have access to, even from when I was a teacher, 10 years ago, what we had available that we could share with parents. That now when I'm able to see what she's doing, it's just incredible to me. So I would imagine that you would have a lot more parent input and thoughts on these things as they have more access. Now, the flip side to that would be if there are barriers for the parents to access these types of materials at home, if they don't have the resources, computers and the like, to be able to work on, help their students at home, if their student doesn't have a device, if it's not one of those districts where they bring something home, then perhaps they may not, those individuals may not be able to have the input. But just from a parent perspective, I'm amazed at what is out there now.
I was snickering a little bit because the notion of technology resources available is a bit of an oxymoron. The answer to the question is yes, it's going to increase, the burden is going to fall on parents exponentially. You're already seeing in many of your districts with the notion of BYOD, bring your own device, ask from the school system. But what does that mean in terms of equity and the digital divide? I give credit to Comcast, companies like Comcast stepping up and offering their Wi-Fi services and reduce costs on Chromebooks and things of that nature. All that's well and good, but to piggyback on an earlier point, if a student does not have access to that same technology at home, what good is the value of the technology in the school space? So yes, they have access to it for 7 hours, and then they go into this black hole, if you will, once they get home. So what does that mean for homework? What does that mean for all these, kind of newer technological spaces? Like, even if you go back to old Dropbox, right? Like if a teacher asks you to leave homework in Dropbox and it says that you have until 11:59 p.m. to submit this information, if I know I have no Wi-Fi literally from 3 o'clock until the next day that I'm home, what does that mean for me? And what does that mean for my homework submission? So those are the kinds of questions that unfortunately people in Tallahassee are not thinking about. And the reason I bring this up was because we all live in a technological age, right? So who here has Wi-Fi in their homes, right? Okay. So your company will tell you that you can link up at maximum 7 devices before you experience the speed slowing down on your own personal Wi-Fi. So imagine being in a school with 2,500 students, then asking those 2,500 students to all log on simultaneously. And what does that mean in terms of the bandwidth and availability of the Wi-Fi just in that space based on our own basic knowledge of how technology works? And we haven't wrestled with those questions. But as it pertains to educational materials, think about that. If I'm in a classroom, an AP classroom, any other classroom, and I need exponentially more speed or more technology to deal with math equations or science equations, how does that impact my time as a teacher in terms of my instructional time? How long do I have? What am I dealing with when I have constant shutdowns and computer-related issues happening in that space? And those are the questions that you're supposed to answer before you make this push for technological. But what I'm trying to tell you is that the push has already happened. And they put these arbitrary dates and extensions on here like, okay, we'll have this figured out in 3 years. iPhone doesn't figure its stuff out in 3-year increments. How does the state expect to equip, get to a one-on-one, and also deal with constant, ever-changing technological issues, hacking being probably number 3 on that list? And those are the things that I think, again, organizations like Fatima, and again, coalition spaces are important in making sure that legislators wrestle with those questions, because they always come at it from a, oh, well, my child's on his iPad, so therefore every child should have an iPad. Sounds great. Until you realize that you're only putting $30 million in the technological buys for the state. And I don't know how much your iPad costs, but if that translates to every student, you're talking about $15 per student. Now, if you find a $15 iPad, let me know and let the rest of the world know. Or maybe not, because I don't know how you found that. But those are the kinds of issues that we really have to think about.
Yes, thank you.
May I make a comment?
Of course.
The senator gave me a window of opportunity and I want to take advantage of it. I don't know if anyone has recently read any of the articles, but as you know, a natural disaster occurred in Panama City area as well as North Carolina. And as I'm reading these articles, they're trying to do makeshift schools. Obviously, the students have been out of school for a long time now in some of the areas. And the schools that have all of this technology and all this wonderful one-to-one devices, right now that infrastructure is not up and running, and then there's areas where they're not even sure when that's even going to happen. So the fact that, we talked about, even the panel before us talked about a hybrid model, here we have these areas that are reaching out for print materials so that they can educate their children during this tough times. So I completely agree with what the senator was just saying. So I just wanted to let everybody know that.
And you just left me a little window just to piggyback. No, just real quick, because it made me think about something based on the area that we're in right now. And it was argued that NASA spent a couple $1 million trying to develop a pen that would be able to write in space because of the lack of gravity. While the whole time the Russians just use pencils. I say that to say, sometimes it's using the KISS model is still a good way to do it. Just keep it simple, stupid. You know what I mean? Is, sometimes the learning and the way in which we approach things, we try to overcomplicate things based on our access to technology, when in reality, we understand how children learn just based on the nature of how we raise them, right? And so, sometimes we like to have these deeper, highbrow conversations in our mind about how we get to this point, that point. More importantly, how do we get the information to these students, period.
And I agree, and my daughter teaches first grade in Franklin County, so we lived that for a while with the hurricane, so definitely with no internet and anything, it's difficult, So anyway, on to another question. We appreciate those responses. This one's kind of a tougher. I hate to even bring it up, but I'm going to say it anyway, because we kind of heard a little about possibly last year we were at the session, up in Tallahassee. So do you ever anticipate the elimination of instructional materials as a categorical portion of the state funding? Okay, and we'll let Jesse answer.
I don't want to say anticipate, but that's one of the most important things that Fatima can focus on and not lose sight of, is that it's always a possibility. And I get nervous when we start hearing conversations about, we're going to be taking a really good look at the FEFP, maybe we'll do things differently. When they start having those conversations, there can be a temptation to roll some of those categoricals in, and then that's where you really get lost. We see, you look at safe schools, instructional materials, transportation, everyone's down. Well, if those are rolled in, it's not quite as obvious how much you are lacking in resources, right? So I think it is, I have not heard specific rumors about that, particularly this year, but that is something that we are always on target, listening, watching for, and that's where your organization and then other like-minded associations are going to be very vital in that discussion if there ever is any effort for that.
Sure. Just piggybacking, what you want to really look at is how they view technology and educational instructional materials and the melding of those two into one line item. And again, going back to the purchasing of the technology versus what goes on that technology, now being in one category means that you're going to see a potential impact. And I would use the example of transportation as one of those things, because no one could conceive the idea of schools not having buses to transport students until you have a recession. And the first session I served in was during the Great Recession. And they were like, well, we're going to combine transportation to the FEFP. And I was just like, I don't understand how that makes sense. And sure enough, what you've seen in many of your counties is activities buses that no longer happen to be there. Or, they're blowing out what used to be within a 2-mile radius is now increased to within a 5-mile radius, in which students cannot have access to school transportation. And a lot of that is because you can no longer watch that singular line item anymore. So absolutely agree that you want to keep that line item in there as long as you possibly can in order to make sure you know what resources are or are not going to that specific area.
I'll just add to the fact that I do remember the time, I guess that means I'm getting old when I always say I remember the time. But I remember a time in the categorical where there actually was a line item for technology. And I don't know if any of you remember that, you know, back in the day, and then that disappeared. And it took a long time and a lot of discussion and a lot of hard work to have that placed back into the categorical. So I would hope, to piggyback on what everybody else has said, as long as Fatima can continue the message on how important it is to keep that line item